to let everyone know, I will be recording this session. This is just so that people who were not present, some of the volunteers who wasn't present today, that they'll be able to watch it at a later date. So just to let you know that. So welcome everyone to today's webinar on dealing with loss. My name is Ezra Ben Israel, and I am the owner of Edifying Answers, which is a training consultancy that aims to empower individuals and unlock insight. And that will be one of the things that I'm hoping to do through this webinar, in particular on dealing with loss. So just in terms of for this webinar, the kind of etiquette what we're going to be using. So we will have a chat box facility. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Zoom, but basically there is a chat box facility. So basically if you click on the 3 dotted lines, it will bring up another option for you, and one of those will be the chat facility. So there'll be some parts where I'll ask you to give some feedback and where you can use the chat to do that. And there's also an options of doing reactions. So if you find that there's something that you really agree with or that you found really beneficial, you can either give a thumbs up or a clap to let me know I'm on the right track. And also throughout the webinar, you can also use the chat if you want to give any kind of positive statements, like, you know, that really resonates with me, or I can really understand and relate to that. And also if you have any questions, you can kind of put them in the chat as you're going along. And at the end, if we do have any spare time, then I can go back and look over and maybe answer any questions that have come up during the webinar. Is that okay with everyone? Is everyone okay with using the chat facility and stuff like that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, good. So just to give a kind of well-being disclaimer. So obviously we're going to be talking about dealing with loss, and it can be quite emotive in terms of some of the stuff we're bringing up or triggering past things for individuals. So my most important thing, what I want for today, is for you to stay safe and only share what you feel comfortable sharing. If you do need at any point to just take a break or you know, to kind of step away from the screen, that's fine. Make sure you take care of yourself. And as I always say, it's okay to not be okay. So don't feel that you know, you have to kind of soldier on if something does come up for you during the session. So my promise for you today in this workshop is that we will be exploring and looking at what is grief. We'll be exploring the different forms that separation and loss can come in. We'll be looking over the transitional model, the British transitional model that people experience when they go through change. We'll be reflecting over the emotional and the physical symptoms of loss. And we'll also look at the stages of grief that an individual will go through. And then finally, we'll be examining some of the coping strategies to manage loss and change when people experience it. So I think just to start off, I think it's really important that we all recognize and understand that everybody at some point in their life will have to deal with separation and loss, regardless of what form that may come in. And that we will have to experience it in many different forms and many different stages in our lives. And that could be loss of a loved one, that could be changing jobs, moving houses. There's so many different ways that people can experience separation and loss. So with loss also comes grief. And, you know, grief is a natural response to loss. And it's the emotional suffering that people feel when something or someone you love is taken away. And it's often the pain of loss that can feel overwhelming. When people are experiencing that loss, it's, you know, it's like a bit of you is taken away, and that's what makes it hard for people to cope and to manage, especially in the initial stages of that loss. And the pain of grief can also disrupt physical health, making it difficult to sleep, to eat, and even to think straight. And I think this is a really important part that we have to be aware of, especially if you're trying to support or help someone who is going through the pain of grief. because it can have profound effects on people, both emotionally and physically. And we're going to look at that a bit later. But, it can completely change people's behavior, their mindset, and their attitude about life. And these are normal reactions to loss. And the more significant the loss is, the more intense that the grief will be. I mean, I remember I worked with a lady, and when her sister was murdered, she didn't grieve until 2 years later. So it can affect people in total different ways. There's no set prescription in terms of how long it will be and how the person will respond and react to the grief. So, question. So, what are some of the ways that people can experience separation or loss? So, in the chat, if you just write down any that you kind of aware of, or maybe you've experienced, or that someone else has experienced, what's the different types of separation and loss that people can experience? Yep. So we've got divorce, definitely. Loneliness, yeah, absolutely. Death of a loved one, yeah, definitely, or a family member. And I think especially one of the interesting things in terms of when someone loses a loved one, and especially if it's their partner who they've been with for a long time, and what they basically say is, because um, when you've been with someone for so long, what generally happens is there's some things that you will leave for the partner to do, and there's some things that the partner will leave for you to do. And so when they lose that loved one, it's literally like a part of them dies, because you always equated that task or that thing to that other individual. And so there can be a real gap in terms of within that individual during that time. And a life-changing illness or injury, absolutely, that can be a massive one in terms of the loss that it causes. Absolutely. So let's look at a few. So we've got divorce, which was covered. We've got injury and the loss of limbs, which was covered. Death. Now, substances. Now, this is one that often people bypass or neglect. And I think it's really important. So I've worked in substance misuse since 2005. And one of the things that I've found over the years is that when people are using substances, it is literally a relationship that they're in. And just like if any of you who are in a relationship, you will talk to that partner or that individual when you're going through good things, when you're going through bad things. You like to spend time with them. They often can be a coping mechanism when things are getting difficult for you. Well, that is no different between the relationship that someone will have with the substance. They'll take that substance when they're feeling good. They'll take it when they're feeling down. They'll take it when they want to celebrate. They take it when they want to cope. And when they stop using substances, it can also feel like a bereavement, like a real sense of loss. Because for some people, the substance has been the only consistent factor in their life. And even though the substance is also creating havoc in their life, it's also that one thing that remains there and is consistent for them. And so there can really be a loss. Many clients that I've worked with have experienced a sense of loss when they stopped using substances. Then we've also got end of relationships, friendships, that end, whether it be because of an argument or whether it be because, you've kind of moved far away, moved countries. That can also be a loss that people experience. Losing and moving home. So especially if it's the house that you've grown up in, and for whatever reason, the house has got lost, or you had to sell it because of debt, or even just moving out of a neighborhood that you've lived for a long time and that you was comfortable. There can also be a loss in that. And then, job losses, being fired, there can be, you can have a real sense of community within one workplace. And then when you move, even if you've chosen to move because you've got a promotion, but when you go to that other place, there's not that same sense of unity and family kind of orientated ways of being, and there can be a real sense of loss there. And the big one, which is quite present now, is COVID-19. COVID-19 has caused all types of separation and loss. Even people working remotely, can feel a sense of loss. They're not, engaging with people. They're not having that people contact. If anyone is self-isolating because of health issues, they can't even see their family members. So there's a real sense of loss, within, not even just within this nation, but across the nations, because of COVID-19. So separation and loss can go in so many different ways. Even if someone loses, a pet that they really loved, if someone's gone into retirement, like there can be loss can come in so many different shapes, ways and forms. So it's important to be aware of that. So personal experiences of separation and loss. So would anyone like to share an experience that you've gone through in the past, and how you kind of dealt with that separation and loss? And it doesn't have to be anything deep. It could be a very small thing, but just, would anyone like to share? So if you do, you can unmute and just, share about what it was and kind of how you dealt with it. No one want to share? Okay. So I think, just in terms of that though, it's really important to be aware that there is two sides to, how people deal with the loss. There is the feelings that they actually experience, and then there's the behaviors that can manifest themselves as a result of, that loss. And so one of the interesting things is that for many people, they don't realize that there is a difference between the transition that people go through and change. So a change can happen instantaneously. So if someone passes away, or if you get fired, or, if your pet dies, like that change is instantaneous. Yeah, the person's gone, or you're not in that job anymore. But the transition can take a lot longer to go through. And there's a reason, because there's different stages that people have to go through. So the first stage of that is the ending. And that can create anger, it can create shock, denial, fear, and sadness. And it can take a time for people to go through that transition of even that first stage of the ending. And once they've gone through that, they'll get to the kind of what we know as the neutral zone. And this is where there's a bit of confusion, a bit of frustration, the kind of apathy sets in. What's the point? And a lot of skepticism. Yeah. So the way that people view life, the way they view their future, it can really change from how it was before that change and that transition, or that, loss, manifested itself. And then over change, it goes to, new beginning. So where that person can start to accept what's happened now, and there's a new bit of energy that comes back. There's an excitement and a commitment to continuing to live their life again. And so it's really important that in our own personal lives, but when supporting other people, that we be aware of transition and the transitional model. And I remember in an organization that I used to work for previously, and when they implemented a change in terms of how we worked, so everyone used to have their own desk, but they went to a hot desk policy. So no one had their own desk anymore, and anyone could work anywhere. Now that change was implemented straight away, but the transition of that was what took a long time to happen, because people still felt that's my desk. People didn't feel comfortable going onto certain desks because they knew that certain characters would respond a certain way. And so the transition of that change, it took maybe a couple of months later for that to actually to manifest itself, and for that smooth transition to take place. So it's really important that we be aware of the transition that goes alongside with any change that takes place. So what I'd like us to look at now is the Kubler-Ross's, change curve. And so when going through a change, when we're experiencing the loss and we're trying to find our way through that emotionally, there's a certain set of responses, that we will go through. So as we look at this, chart and model, we see across going up vertically, you've got the morale and the competences. And then going across, horizontally, we've got the time frame. And so when the change happens, when the loss happens, initially there is that shock. There's that surprise, in relation to the event. I can't believe this person's gone. I can't believe I've lost my job, whatever the situation may be. And then they'll go through a stage of denial. And I always say denial stands for don't even know I am lying. And there's this disbelief. It's looking for evidence, that isn't true, trying to find a way to make sense of what's going on. And so in this time, it's really important to have a creative alignment in terms of, connecting with something that will help the reality to set in. Because often in this place, people are looking for things to help the denial to remain strong. And it's about having that creative alignment with something that's going to give you evidence that a change has taken place. Then after the denial comes the frustration. So they're starting to recognize that things are different, and sometimes they can become angry. And so in this time for individuals, it's really important to maximize communication, to talk things through, to be able to share what's going on for that individual. Because if they keep everything inside, it just bottles up. And eventually what happens is when we have repressed emotions, they will come out sideways with the wrong person and in the wrong way. So after frustration, it comes the depression, so the low mood, the lack of energy. And often in this stage, people need that spark of motivation. They need, whether it's people talking to them, whether it's, connecting with other people, whether it's getting help by a professional, they need something to help to kind of boost them up and to help their energy levels to come back up. And eventually after that dip, they'll start to come out of that low state and will start to experiment. So this is the initial engagement with the new situation now. They're starting to accept what's happened, and it's about developing, their capability now. What do they need to do now? What kind of support do they need? How will they need to function differently as a result of this change or this loss that has taken place? Then they get to the place of decision. So they're learning how to work in a new situation, feeling more positive about themselves and about the situation itself. And this is where there's a lot of sharing of knowledge, sharing what's going on for them, speaking to other people, finding out different ways of doing things, hearing from other people who've also gone through similar processes. Because everyone will experience loss in their own way. Even if for example, if someone's father's died and then your father's died, you will still experience it in completely different ways. And then after that decision comes the integration. So changes are integrated and there is a renewed individual now. And it doesn't mean they've forgotten about the loss, but they're able to manage it. They're able to go on living rather than just existing. And so this is really important that we also understand the emotional responses that come with change and loss. So there is some emotional symptoms of loss that are universal, that they're common for most people to experience regardless of what that loss may be. And so the first one is the shock and disbelief. So it can be very hard for people to accept that something has changed or that loss has taken place, whether it be COVID-19, whether it be in breaking up with a partner, whether you've been burgled, or there's a loss of a family member. And what generally tends to happen is people feel numb and a kind of sense of denial. They don't want to accept that it's happened. They don't want to believe that it's happened. And they're constantly telling themselves, no, this ain't true. This ain't true. There's also, a sadness, a profound sadness. It's a universally experience. I'm sure we can all, lay testament to the fact where we've experienced sadness due to a loss, and it's a symptom of grief. So it's like emptiness and that kind of despair and a deep loneliness, as someone was saying earlier, that people can experience. People may cry a lot and feel emotionally unstable. It's like, I can't cope with this, I can't manage, this is too difficult for me. And then next also comes guilt. So there can be regret, maybe for things that were said, especially if someone had an argument with someone and that was the last thing that was said before someone's passed away. Or even if there's been unresolved issues for a long time and you never got to resolve them. There can be a lot of guilt and feeling that you should have made amends or you should have done things differently. And even sometimes people take it on themselves to feel that they should have prevented it from happening, even though there was nothing you could have done. But these are the kind of things that people may go through when they've experienced a loss. And then another one is anger. So people feel angry and resentful. And often with that, there comes a lot of blame, whether it's blaming themselves, whether it's blaming God, whether it's blaming the doctors, or even the person that has now passed away for abandoning that individual. So there could be a great sense of anger that just kind of, boils up and unleashes itself in the most, you know, unexpected times and ways. And then there can be a lot of fear. With loss comes, a significant amount of fear and worry about the future, about what's going to happen. There's a lot of anxiousness and helplessness and feeling insecure. And with this often can come panic attacks. And panic attacks are often when there's a onset or a quick situation that comes up that causes a lot of panic in the individual. And, the interesting thing about panic attacks is that, they're not life threatening, but people can feel like they're going to die, especially when they have their first one because they don't understand what's happening. And panic attacks can be quite traumatic. They normally last between 20 minutes to an hour, but in rare cases, people can have cluster panic attacks where they have continuous ones. I actually know someone who has had like 7 hour cluster panic attacks, which can be quite debilitating. So, loss affects people in different ways with a range of symptoms and feelings that can come to head as a result. And I think, it's important to recognize and understand that people can have all types of unusual feelings, whether it's feeling like they're going crazy, like the world is spinning around them, like they're in a bad dream. And quite often people can question their own morals and their beliefs and what they stand upon, when they're going through the initial stages of managing and trying to deal with a loss that has occurred. Then we also have the physical symptoms that come with loss. And, there's things like the hyperactivity. So, and it can also be the opposite where they feel debilitated and they can't do anything, where that kind of depression kind of sets in. Tightness in the throat. This is often a common one for people. Physical distress and aches and pains. And often with the physical distress and aches and pains, it's a sign of repressed emotions. Because what happens is if we don't let out emotions that need to be let out, they then go in and downwards within us. And they start to manifest themselves in headaches, in back pains, in neck pains, in tension. So it's really important when people are dealing with a loss, is that they do talk about things, that they do let out their emotions, because it can be quite damaging if we try and hold them in. And it's also a never-ending fight because your emotions are never going away. So if you don't express them and let them out, they'll continuously trying to bring themselves up so they can do what they're meant to do. There can also be changes in appetite, which would affect, weight change. So people can start overeating or not eating. Yeah, it can go either way. And with the weight change, especially if people start to drink a lot, because sometimes people will drink to try and cope and manage. And alcohol has a lot of calories in it and not many nutritional values. So that's also why people can put on a lot of weight. Fatigue and tiredness. So, with weight, with loss and, separation, what happens is people don't sleep properly. And sleep is fundamental for our well-being and enable us to function. They say that if you have an hour or more less sleep on a continuous basis, it actually affects your decision making as if you had a pint of beer. So when people are not sleeping right, it has a humongous effect on their overall well-being. And then sleep problems, as I'm saying there, it can be really difficult for people trying to manage, trying to cope. They'll have rumination of thoughts, meaning they're continuously thinking about things, and it keeps them up. For people who are having sleeping problems, and because they've got brain fog or they've got a lot of things going on in their mind, a good thing that they can do to help with that is just writing down their thoughts. And when you do that, it allows it to come out of your head onto paper, and then people find that they can sleep better afterwards. Then the other symptoms is crying. So people just, feel so overwhelmed, and it's kind of too much for them. Now, a lot of people don't realize that crying is actually one of the healthiest ways of us expressing ourselves, because crying allows you to express yourself in a way that words could never utter. And that's why when people have emotions that are too strong for them, or stuff that's going on that's really pushing them to the edge, that's why they will cry, even if they don't want to. Because crying is a language that words could never speak. But anyone who has gone through experience where you've gone through a lot of stress, or you've experienced a loss and you cry, you will notice that you feel a bit better afterwards, because it is a form of therapy, just like talking is a form of therapy. And then we have shortness of breath. And that's something that can also happen when people experience a loss, because often that will trigger the adrenaline, which is your fight or flight response, which will mean that you'll start to have shorter breaths, because your body's going into either survival mode, where you're going to run or you're going to fight. And so people can have this shortness of breath and feel that they can't breathe. And again, this could be the thing that could also trigger on panic attacks. So the stages of grief. So the Kubler-Ross model of grief describes that there are 5 primary responses to loss. Does anyone know what any of those are, or can you guess what any of those are? Just put it in the chat box, what you think any of those 5 may be. So we've got anger, got denial, yep. Acceptance, yep. Sadness, we've got rejection. Okay, so let's look at this. So these are the 5. So we've got denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Now, it's important that we bear in mind, although this is the way it's written here is the kind of stages that people tend to go through, but when people are grieving, they may go through the stages in any way, and they may return back to previous stages as well. Okay. So with the denial, generally statements will be like, I can't believe this is happening to me right now. I can't believe this person's gone. So there's that kind of stage of denial. So individuals may refuse to accept that a loss has occurred, and they may minimize the impact or even deny that the incident has even taken place. Yeah, so they might say, no, 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 it's fine. Don't, no, she hasn't died. She's just sleeping. There'll be things that they will say um, to try and convince themselves, because they're in a state of denial. Don't even know that I am lying. They're lying to themselves about the situation. If it's been a separation from a partner, they'll be, no, 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 she's just angry, or he's just angry. They'll get over this. We'll work this out. Even though the person's saying, this is it. I want that divorce. This is it. I don't want to be with you anymore. And then after the denial, it comes the anger. So statements may be things like, why on earth is this happening to me? Why do I have to go through this? So they'll have these kind of statements that kind of show the anger that they're experiencing. And this is because the individual realized now that the change has occurred. So they become angry at themselves and others. So depending on what the reason for that grief and that loss may be, they may blame themselves, whether it is partly their fault or whether it isn't their fault. And they can become angry if someone else has had a part to play in it, that other individual as well. And blame is often um, um, a response when people are angry. And that's not even when it's just grief. Even if there's an argument or something's happened, like I always say to people, it takes two to tango. Even if someone had more of a part to play in it, if you've got into an argument, both of you had a part to play, but people often just blame the other person. It's their fault why this happened. Then we have bargaining. So I will do anything to change this. And what you'll find at this stage is that people will try to change or delay the loss. And they'll do often unhealthy things to try and keep that individual, try to keep the relationship, or try to make things better again, even though the loss has occurred. If they've been fired for the job, they may continue to call up and try to get that job back. And what often happens at this stage is that people will tend to cling to any thread of hope because they're in this stage of kind of bargaining with the loss, even though the loss has already occurred. And this can be quite a difficult stage for people because they will keep trying things that's not going to work. And then as a result of that, and when they get to the end of that bargaining stage, this is where depression can come in. And that person feels like, what's the point of going on with life? Why am I even here? How can I live without this individual? And this is because the reality of the loss that will occur or has occurred is finally set in. They're no longer in denial. They're no longer trying to change this no more. They're not blaming people anymore. The reality has hit them. And they often tend to then isolate themselves. And, isolation is one of the big factors that create so many problems. And that's why, like with the elderly now, they're doing a lot of things to kind of reduce isolation because it's interesting. I was doing research for a different presentation I was doing, and I was looking at the kind of benefits of connecting with people, especially during COVID-19. And there was a study that was done. I think it was on the study of the amount of people. I think it was over 100,000 people, and there was about 30 or 40 different studies that was done around this. And the pool of people was everyone. So it was young, old, it was people who exercise, people who didn't exercise, people who smoke a lot, people who didn't smoke. And what they found as a significant factor across all of the individuals, they said that if you have good connections in your life, people that you can connect with, regardless if you're a person that smokes all the time or who doesn't smoke, that you have a longer chance of life. And so the thing about isolation is that it kills people. It really does. And so when people are in that depression state, it's really important, or if you as an individual is in that state, it's really important to try and push yourself out of it and to connect with people, because that's the only way that people can start to find a sense in life and some meaning again, rather than just isolating and ruminating over your thoughts. And often at this stage, people spend a lot of time crying and grieving, and people can be in this stage for a long period of time. And then finally, the final step is acceptance. And this is when the person now accepts the reality of what's gone on and is starting to find that meaning again. It's going to be okay. And this doesn't mean that they're perfect and they're fine. It's just like there was before the incident happened, but they can manage now. So the individual would accept the loss and they understand the situation logically. So if it's, for example, someone's passed away, they accept that, this person wasn't going to be with me forever. And they can reflect over and realize, I spent a long time with them. We lived together for 10, 15, 20 years. They wasn't young anymore. So, they wasn't going to live forever. And logically now they can start to process this. And they've come to terms with it emotionally. Now, it doesn't mean that they're still not upset. It doesn't mean that they still miss the individual or the animal or whatever it may be. but they have accepted. And that makes a big difference. And I really love this quote. So it says, grief is not a disorder, a disease, or a sign of weakness. It is an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity. The price you pay for love, the only cure for grief is to grieve. And that's one of the things that people often think, oh, I'm not going to grieve. I don't want to grieve for the children, or I'm going to be strong. And that's one of the worst things people can do, because you need to grieve. That's the only way to cure grief. And it can eat you up and eat you up, or the individual, until they actually do that. But that is the only way to go through the process. You have to go through it to get out the other end. So there is an acronym for dealing with grief, and it's based on tear. So like the teardrop, but it actually has an acronym meaning. So the T stands for to accept the reality of the loss. Until someone accepts the reality of the loss, okay, they're always going to be going in turmoil and have an inner conflict, because the reality around them is showing them that a change has occurred, but mentally in their mind and in their thinking, they're saying it's still the same. So until people accept the reality of the loss, there is an inner conflict, an inner war that will take place. Then the E is to experience the pain of the loss. And this can be very difficult for people, because none of us want to experience pain. But until we experience that pain of the loss, we can never move on. Because it's in that experiencing the pain and accepting it that we can move on. And then the A is about adjustment. So once we've gone through the pain and we've come out the other end, and we now accept it, we can adjust to the new environment, whether it's psychologically, physically, mentally, or emotionally, without the lost person or thing. And then the R is to reinvest in that new reality. So reinvest in life without that individual. Reinvest in life as a result of that loss of limb because of whatever happened. And so that is the process and the task of how people deal with grief. And again, that's not done in a day or a week or a month. This can be over a process of year and years in some cases. So what we're going to do next, the final thing, is going to look at some of the kind of coping strategies of how people can kind of manage and deal with loss when it occurs. And I just want to say and highlight that, when coping with the loss of someone or something that you love, it is one of life's biggest challenges. There'll probably be nothing that rocks us more than when we lose something that we love dearly, something that's been our rock and our support and a part of our lives. So it's really important that when we're looking at managing that, and if you're supporting anyone who is trying to manage that, that we give as many options as possible. So the first one is to turn to friends and family members. Sometimes people feel, I don't want to be a burden, or, I've got to be strong in this time. And actually, it's not. No man is an island. No one can do it by themselves. And, it's in our lowest points that we need support from other people. We need to connect with other individuals. Two is better than one. The second thing is that we need to express, or you need to express yourself creatively. So when people experiences loss, sometimes verbally they can't bring those words to life, or they don't know how to say it. But sometimes just keeping a journal, just writing down your thoughts and what's going on for you can be quite powerful. And if you've lost a loved one, you can write a letter to them saying all the things that you wanted to say, but you didn't get to say. Or people can have like a scrap book or photo album, which kind of celebrates that individual's life. So there's something that you can do to kind of keep the memories that you have of that person, alive. So that often helps people they can do something, to kind of Say, this is what I'm doing for you. Number 3 is about joining a support group. So grief can feel very lonely for individuals, even if they have loved ones around. So sometimes just sharing your sorrow with other people who have had similar experiences can really help. Because sometimes family members may not be able to understand it from your viewpoint, and they may be trying to give you advice when you just want someone to listen to you. So sometimes going to a support group where they kind of know and understand the processes, you can get that additional support. Number 4 is about talking to a therapist or a grief counselor. So sometimes the grief can be so toxic in that individual's life. It can be really difficult for that person to even cope and manage with life, dealing with that loss. And so sometimes people can get that additional help from a professional where they can experience grief counseling and kind of help to deal with and process and manage those stages that come with loss. Number 5 is facing your feelings. So what often happens is people will try to repress their grief. And you can only do that for so long. It will break people down. It will cause people to experience mental health issues. It will cause your body to start to manifest those repressed emotions. So in order to heal, although it may be difficult and painful, we have to acknowledge that pain. And avoiding feelings of sadness and loss will only prolong the grieving process. And and everyone has to learn that their own individual way in their own time, but that is the reality. Number 6 is try to maintain your hobbies and your interests. So there's comfort in routine and getting back to activities that bring you joy and connect you closer to others. And so, again, this is the complete opposite of isolation, and it's really important that doing something really helps to keep the body healthy and to keep the mind healthy. So doing things that you enjoy, things that will help to take your mind off things to get you outside the house and out of the bed, are really important. And then looking after your physical health. So there is a mind and body connection. When we're looking after our physical health, it would also help us to deal with things psychologically and emotionally. So it's really important to look after our physical health. And then finally, it's about planning ahead for grief triggers. So anniversaries, holidays, milestones, there's various different types of things that can reawaken memories and feelings of that person or thing that someone has lost. So it's really important if you're supporting someone who has gone through a loss or they're coming up to the anniversary of a loss, to prepare them for the emotional kind of wallop that's going to come up when those anniversaries come around. And to know that it's completely normal, but to just be aware of it and kind of have your support plan of what you're going to do. So you might know around that time you'll be engaging and talking to people more. Around that time you may be going to the support group. Even if you don't go throughout the year, that might be the time where you're going to for a few weeks go, because it's a difficult time for you. So it's really important that we look at a whole range of different ways that we can support either ourselves or other individuals when they're going through loss. So, is there any questions? Anything that's come up? Anything that people wanted to ask about? If you do, just unmute.
Hi, thanks for presenting so elegantly. It's a really good presentation. The last bit around anniversaries really does resonate for me and my client base.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that slide, the previous slide, really helpful in terms of things that can help. was just wondering if you've got any kind of practical steps that what to do and how to kind of approach that with a client as well, because they might not necessarily be forthcoming until the anniversary hits, and then going through a difficult time.
Yeah, so I think one of the things, obviously with your clients, and you build up the relationship and you build up rapport with them, um, that it's really important in terms of finding out as much of their journey. So in terms of when you're having these discussions, so for example, if you have a client that's maybe using substances, um, I would often ask, what got you to using substances? What kind of happened to you? And they might say it was this happened or that happened. And then you'll kind of say, okay, one of the things that I would often say to people, it's important to be aware of when you're coming around to the anniversary of that often can bring up things for you, even if it's 10, 15, 20 years later, because sometimes people don't make that connection and they just think, what's going on for me? But actually it's those anniversaries coming up. And just to bring it up in their mind, sometimes they might make the connection and go, yeah, actually, every year this happens to me. And that's where they get the understanding around it. Also, if you can kind of see that someone's reacting differently and there's no apparent reason they don't know, you can just ask that question. Is this coming around to any kind of anniversaries of something that you've lost or something that was quite difficult for you in the past? And that may trigger their awareness around that area. So I hope that helps. So I think, and it depends on a case by case basis, but never feel that asking that question like is the wrong thing to do, because it's not. Like you need to ask that question to be able to find out, and that may actually help them to realize what's actually going on for them.
That's great. Thanks for that, Ezra.
That's okay. Any other questions?
It's not really a question.
Mm.
It's just a reflection. Thank
Okay.
you for that.
That's
I thought
okay.
it was great. And actually, I did lose my dad. And now I'm going to get upset. But 5 years ago this weekend,
Okay.
and actually I got very angry at the weekend, and I kind of assumed it's all about COVID, but maybe it's not.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you, because actually you just made me, I knew it was coming, but
Yeah.
maybe I hadn't quite put the bits together. So thank you.
That's okay. And thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I've often said to people in the past is that sometimes people think I shouldn't be having these reactions now. It's been 10 years, it's been 5 years, it's been however long. And that's not the case, and it's okay to go through those processes of, feeling a bit angry, feeling that loss, feeling that sense of separation, because it's someone that was significant in your life or something that was significant in your life. So I think that's something as well that can really hold people down, thinking I should be over this now. And there is no getting over this. When it comes around to that time again, those feelings are going to come up, and it's okay. It's okay to process that.
I'm not sure my partner would say the same when I shouted him about the washing up on Friday.
Yeah, and I guess as well, like one of the things I would say, which is really important, when you are the individual who's going through those processes, is to talk about it. It is to let things out, because when you don't, one of the things about anger and anger stamps, I always talk to people about anger stamps. So anger stamps is basically when something happens, and rather than talking about it or addressing it, we put it like it's a book in an anger stamp, in this booklet. And what happens is things just build up and they build up and they build up and they build up. And eventually what happens is there's no more space within you for those anger stamps that you've put there. And so what happens is it will come out on the wrong person in the wrong way. They become the scapegoat. And so and that's why it's really important to talk, and to explore and to talk about things. And even if it's coming up to the anniversary and stuff, to have that conversation with your partner or with someone who's, your significant other, who may get the brunt of it, because then at least they can understand what's going on. It makes a big difference. you know.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's okay.
I think the other reflection that I have on the passing of time, so like Jane lost my dad, but it's 14 years ago, and so you know the reflection, oh, it's so long ago, why do I feel this way? I don't feel that. I actually more struggle with the passing of time and the fact that it's 14 years since I spoke to my dad and I can't remember really what he sounds like, or you know, memories start to fade. So I actually feel that the more time goes on, sometimes I feel upset by that aspect.
Yeah. And this is the thing about grief. There is no subscription to it. There is no template to it. It would affect everyone in different ways. And it's a personal lifelong journey. You know, and I think that's why when I was talking about where people would have a scrapbook or they would do certain things, because it's to keep those memories alive. It's to keep you know, that person as close to you as possible. You know, so there is, and that's why often people would write down journals, because the journal might be, I remember when my dad, partner, wife, whoever it was, did this. I remember when we had that conversation, so that you're keeping those memories, because as time goes on, you would forget. But if you've written it down, you always have it. So yeah, so that's again another reason why the journaling is quite good, you know, because especially during the beginning stages, you're going through so much things because you're remembering everything what's happened in your past. You're remembering everything that happened in that relationship. So if you are doing the journaling during that time, even though it may not make sense, after you've gone over that process and you look back over it, there's a rich amount of material that you will have that will be beneficial to you in the later years, like what you're talking about now.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's okay. Anyone else, any questions before I do the last few slides?
It's not a question, but when you were discussing the change curve, I could really relate in how I responded to the virus, the lockdown, like with the initial kind of denial.
Yes.
And just the shock of it. Obviously, it's horrendous, but then somehow we adapted to the situation.
Absolutely.
I can't remember all the exact stages now, but I think I very much went through that kind of process.
Yeah, we do, and I think it's one of those things that there's a lot of things that we do not really understanding what we've gone through. And I think with this particular topic, it's one of those things. So when people understand, okay, these are the 5 stages of grief, this is why that's happening to me, you know, or the change curve, or even the Bridges transitional model. Like some people will say to themselves, but this has happened, why am I not accepting it? Well, actually, because transition goes through a different process of the change. Change is instantaneous. Like if that change happens, it's happened. Like there's nothing you can do about it. But how you respond to that emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, that's a transition. That doesn't just happen overnight. You know, so it's really important that we do have an understanding of those things, because it helps us to be able to process things and accept the changes that we're going through, rather than thinking, I'm just going crazy. Why have I not gotten over this? You know.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so my screen dropped on me. There you go. So just a few things. So this is my YouTube channel, which is Ezra, A.K.A. Voice of Reason. I do have a whole range of different stuff, from my webinars to motivational talks and stuff that I do on there. So it's a rich place of resources. There is some of my masterclass webinars, like the resilience and burnout one you can see there, which it's not access to anyone, because those ones people have to pay a small fee, and then I send them the link to be able to access that. But there is loads of free stuff on there as well. So if you get a chance, have a look on there. There's lots of useful information and things about the mind and how the mind processes things, your thoughts and the power of your thoughts. So there's lots of useful information on there. And also, if you do go on it, do subscribe and hit the bell so you're notified when I do upload new videos. Just in terms of my details, if anyone's interested, there's my details there. You can screenshot it or take a photo of it. And if you do want to get in touch with me, or if you want to find out about any other workshops that I'm doing, I am currently running a Living Your Best Life webinar, which is a free webinar. It's a 7-part series. So tomorrow is part 2 of that, which is at the same time, 6 o'clock. So if any of you are interested, then you can sign up to that via Eventbrite. Just type in Living Your Best Life, and you can be a part of that. So just to say, if there was one thing you take away from today, or one thing that you really found useful about it, if we can just take turns and let me know, what was that? What would be that one thing you'll take away from today?
I think for me, it was around the coping strategies. And, you know, as and when I find out clients are approaching an anniversary, it'll be good to check to see which of those strategies they're currently implementing, and maybe seeing if we can come up with a way of implementing a few more, just so they're kind of buffered against, you know, the harshness of an anniversary coming up.
Absolutely. And I think the really important one is to highlight to them that there is groups available, because most people are not aware of that, and they're free, you know, so they can get that kind of emotional support. And especially if they feel they don't want to burden their family members, that's a great option to kind of direct them to.
No, thanks for that.
I think
for me, Ezra, it was the quote from Earl Grolman. I was really struck by how genius it is, because that is very true, that grieving is a process that you just have to get through.
Absolutely.
No escaping it. So that was really, really good.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
I think mine was similar in that it's moving through to acceptance. You know, I think the COVID, I've also had, like Rose, the sort of like that thing about COVID, about the loss of all my freedoms, loss of spontaneity, and actually feeling quite down about it all. But actually, yeah, somehow you do move through to acceptance. So holding on to that bit.
Absolutely. And one of the things, not just with grief and loss, but in general in life, and I always tell people this, is that it's not the situation itself that causes us the most pain. It's how we view and look at that situation that causes us more problems. Like with COVID-19, like you said, like if you get to a place of acceptance and we say, okay, like I can't go and see everyone I would like to. I can't do those things I want to do. This is just a process. This will not be for the rest of my life. I have to accept it in this time. COVID-19 is still here, but you can then live rather than just exist, worrying and being anxious. Do you know what I mean? So it's about that acceptance in things that come up in our lives that make the big difference. And for my own personal life, with things that's happened to me, I've seen that that's been such a benefit. Because if you're continuously telling yourself, I can't cope, this is not possible, I can't do this, do you know what? Whatever you believe and you tell yourself, it will come to pass in your life. But if you say, this is the process, this is it, I can accept this, I can move on, it's going to be difficult, but I will get through this, you will, you know? And so it's really important. Acceptance is so important in life, in all areas of our life, you know? What about others? What's one thing you take away?
I mean, yeah, I could definitely relate some of those things, like, you know, the 5 stages of grief to a couple of situations that have happened in my life. And like I said before, also about the pandemic, you know,
yeah.
And it helped me understand my response to certain things better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think for me as well, the physical impact of it as well. So, you know, if you're holding in emotions, the pain, the physical pain, I hadn't thought of it that way before. And actually even thinking about some things, some illnesses that my mum then had in the couple of years after my dad died. I wonder if that was actually her, because she didn't show her emotions.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
wonder
yeah,
now
yeah,
if actually that
yeah.
had a lot to do with her holding.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the interesting things, so you know, like people often say the statement "stress is a killer."
Mm-hmm.
People don't realize the science behind why that statement is made. So when we hold on to repressed emotions, and stress being one of those, stress actually weakens the heart and the brain. So with long term, when people are doing it over a long period of time, and then as a result, you know, the heart and the brain are two of the most important parts. So, and that's what can trigger off so many other issues as well. But definitely, whatever we don't allow to come out, what's meant to come out, it goes in and then it creates problems within. And if you just think about it, not to be crude, but if you've got constipation, right, and you've had constipation for a year, just think of what that would do to you. But people were doing that with other emotions for over a year. So think of the damage what that does internally, you know. So that's essentially why it's so important to talk, you know, and to get it out, definitely.